Tesla has lost 38% of its Canadian market share in 14 months. Not to Ford, not to GM, to a brand most Canadians could not spell 2 years ago. BYD is signing Canadian dealer agreements in the same cities where Tesla showrooms are going dark. What nobody is reporting yet is which segment of Canadian buyers BYD is actually targeting, and it is not the one Tesla is worried about: the Tesla collapse in Canada. By the numbers. The Canadian EV market grew 22% in 2 years. Tesla's volume dropped 38% over the same period. Those two facts cannot both be true unless something structural has broken inside Tesla's Canadian position, and it has. Tesla registered 31,200 vehicles in Canada in 2023. By 2025, that number had fallen to 19,400, according to data compiled by the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. TD Economics projects EV penetration will reach 14% of total new vehicle sales in Canada by the end of 2026. Tesla is not losing ground because the market shrank. Tesla is losing ground while the market expands around it. That is not a cyclical dip. That is a value proposition problem. Here is what the financial math looks like for a Canadian Tesla buyer right now. A base Model 3 long range sits at approximately 59,990 Canadian dollars. It qualifies for the federal IZEV rebate, $5,000 for vehicles priced under $65,000, bringing the effective cost to roughly $54,990. Quebec buyers add another $4,000 provincial rebate, landing at $50,990. That sounds reasonable until you compare it to what BYD is about to offer in the same segment. The BYD Seal, a direct Model 3 competitor, is expected to arrive in Canada at approximately $44,000 to $48,000 Canadian dollars. If BYD achieves Canadian federal certification, that gap widens further. That is a potential $10,000 to $15,000 real-world difference on a single transaction. Mark Rechthofen, a Vancouver-based automotive consultant who has tracked Canadian EV adoption since 2019, told Automotive News Canada in February 2026 that the Tesla decline is not primarily about Elon Musk's public profile. It is about residual value. Tesla Model 3 owners who bought in 2022 are sitting on vehicles worth 30 to 35% less than they paid. That story travels fast in a country where $60,000 is a serious commitment. A Toronto dealer principal confirmed to Automotive News Canada that used Model 3 inventory on his lot had doubled in 90 days, with average days to sale increasing from 18 to 47. Tesla's Canadian collapse is not a brand problem, it is a value proposition problem, and value proposition problems do not fix themselves. They create market openings for whoever is standing next in line. BYD is standing next in line, but the way BYD is moving into Canada is more calculated than anyone is reporting. Segment 2 is where that calculation becomes impossible to ignore. BYD's Canadian dealer strategy, the 20-location play. BYD has retained the Markham, Ontario-based real estate consultancy to identify 20 Canadian dealership locations, with a mandate to have the first 10 signed by Q3 2026, according to a source familiar with the agreement cited by Automotive News Canada. 20 locations. In year 1. For a brand that sold 0 vehicles through an official Canadian dealer network as recently as 18 months ago. To understand why that number is significant, consider the math of the Canadian new vehicle market. Total industry sales in 2025 were approximately 1.87 million units, according to CADA. The Chinese brand segment, BYD, Zeekr, NEO, and several others in various stages of Canadian market entry, is projected to claim between 40,000 and 55,000 of those units by end of 2026. BYD is not entering a wide-open market. It is entering a market with a fixed quota ceiling, shared among an increasing number of competitors, each of whom has the same idea at the same time. The financial model for those 20 dealerships is demanding. A Canadian greenfield dealership, no existing brand footprint, new facility, new staff, requires between 3.5 million and 6 million Canadian dollars in build-out capital, according to industry estimates from the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. To break even on that investment, a dealer principal typically needs to move between 400 and 600 new units per year. BYD's 20 dealers, sharing a projected 2,026 Canadian allocation that industry sources place at roughly 12,000 to 15,000 units, would average between 600 and 750 units per location, tight but achievable assuming BYD hits its allocation and maintains pricing discipline. David Coleman, a dealer principal from Calgary who spent 15 years in the Toyota network before transitioning to independent consulting, told Canadian Auto Dealer magazine in January 2026, "The dealers signing with BYD right now are not gamblers. They are people who watched what happened to the first Honda dealers in 1969. They are betting on the brand, not the car. His point is blunt. The risk is not 2026. The risk is 2028, when the initial agreements come up for renewal and BYD's factory plans, or lack thereof, become clear. The 20-location strategy is not a retail plan. It is an infrastructure play. BYD is building the physical presence it needs for the next phase, which is Canadian manufacturing. And that is where this story stops being about market share and starts being about your wallet. Before I get into that, which is where the numbers get genuinely alarming for anyone shopping for a vehicle right now, hit subscribe. Next week, I am breaking down which Chinese brands have the financial stability to actually survive long-term in the Canadian market, and which ones follow the VinFast path. You need that before you make any purchase decision. That factory question is entry 3, and it is the one that changes everything about the rebate math you have been using to evaluate your next vehicle purchase. The rebate wall. Why BYD's sticker price is not the real price. Here's a number that does not appear in any BYD press release. 0. That is the current federal IZEV rebate available to a Canadian buyer of any BYD vehicle. $0. The federal IZEV program requires that eligible vehicles be assembled in Canada, the United States, or Mexico under the terms of CUSMA. BYD manufactures in China. Until that changes, every BYD listed at $44,000 in a Canadian showroom is actually $44,000. No federal offset, no provincial top-up in most provinces, no deduction. Compare that to a Canadian buyer's alternative in the same price band. A Chevrolet Equinox EV, assembled in Ingersoll, Ontario, starts at approximately $44,995 Canadian dollars. It qualifies for the full $5,000 federal IZEV rebate. Ontario buyers add nothing provincially, but Quebec buyers receive an additional $4,000, bringing the effective price to $35,995 in that province. The real-world comparison between a BYD Atto 3 at $45,000 effective and a Chevrolet Equinox EV at $39,995 effective is not a $5,000 gap. It is a $5,000 to $9,000 gap on a $45,000 purchase. That is 11 to 20% of the transaction price, depending on province. Transport Canada's Appendix G registry, which governs which vehicles qualify for federal incentives, has not added a single Chinese-manufactured vehicle since the IZEV program was revised in 2023. The regulatory exclusion is not accidental. It is deliberate industrial policy, and it is not going away until BYD builds in Canada, which is exactly why BYD's factory announcement, expected sometime in 2026, is the single most important event in the Canadian EV market this year. Jennifer Sue, a financial planner from Mississauga who purchased a BYD Atto 3 through a gray market import in 2024, told the Globe and Mail in March 2026 that the rebate exclusion was not disclosed clearly at the point of sale. I thought it was like any other EV, nobody told me I was getting nothing back. When I filed my taxes, I found out the hard way. Her effective all-in cost was $52,400, nearly $8,000 more than a Hyundai Kona Electric qualified for in the same year. The rebate wall is not a temporary inconvenience. It is the structural disadvantage BYD is trying to eliminate with a Canadian factory. Until that factory exists, every Canadian BYD buyer is an early adopter subsidizing the brand's long-term strategy without receiving any of the subsidies available to buyers of North American assembled vehicles. Segment 4 is where that strategy becomes personal, because BYD's factory plan involves a location that will directly affect one major Canadian labor market, whether that factory gets built or not. The factory gamble, Windsor, Ontario, and the $2.3 billion question. BYD has been in preliminary discussions with the Ontario government regarding a Canadian manufacturing facility since at least Q4 2024, according to a report by the Globe and Mail. The location most frequently cited in those discussions is the Windsor-Essex region, the same area where the Stellantis LG Energy Solution battery plant represents a $5 billion public-private investment in Canadian EV manufacturing capacity. Two anchor investments in the same geography would make Windsor the most concentrated EV production corridor in Canada by 2028. The projected capital cost of a BYD Canadian assembly plant capable of producing 50,000 vehicles per year, the minimum scale that makes Canadian manufacturing economically rational, is estimated at between $1.8 billion and $2.3 billion Canadian dollars, based on comparable greenfield EV assembly facility costs in North America. BYD's global capital position can support that investment. The company reported net cash of approximately $8.4 billion on its balance sheet as of its most recent annual filing. The money exists. What does not yet exist is the political agreement. A BYD Canadian factory triggers a different calculation entirely for the federal government, which must weigh Canadian manufacturing jobs against the 6.1% tariff on Chinese manufactured EVs that was implemented in October 2024. A tariff explicitly designed to make Chinese EV imports less competitive and encourage local investment. A BYD Canadian factory makes that tariff irrelevant, qualifies BYD vehicles for EV rebates, and unlocks up to $9,000 in buyer incentives per vehicle. The incentive for BYD to build in Canada is not goodwill. It is $9,000 per vehicle sold, multiplied by every vehicle it expects to move. Robert Jodick, a Windsor-based economic development consultant who was involved in the Stellantis-LG negotiations, told CBC News in February 2026 that a second major EV facility in Windsor would represent approximately 2,200 direct jobs and an estimated 4,400 indirect positions in the regional supply chain. The question is not whether Windsor can absorb a second anchor. The question is whether Ottawa is willing to structure the incentive package that makes it happen before BYD looks at Tennessee or South Carolina instead. The factory announcement is not a given. BYD is using the threat of building elsewhere, including a site near Nashville, Tennessee, that would qualify for USYRA manufacturing credits, as leverage in negotiations with both the federal government and the province of Ontario. Every week that announcement does not come is a week BYD's Canadian dealers are operating without the rebate qualification that makes their vehicles cost competitive. That leverage game has a deadline, and Segment 5 is where that deadline intersects with a decision you may be making right now. What this means if you are buying a vehicle in Canada in 2026. Every major Canadian lender, RBC, TD, Scotiabank, has now issued guidance on EV residual values for financing and leasing purposes. The consensus position as of Q1 2026, Chinese manufactured EVs without confirmed Canadian dealer networks and without federal rebate qualification are being assigned, or residual values 8 to 12% lower than comparable North American assembled EVs at the same price point. That gap translates directly into your monthly payment if you are leasing. Run the numbers on a 48-month lease. A BYD Atto 3 at $45,000 with a 48% residual value, the figure TD Auto Finance is currently using, produces a depreciation base of $23,400. A Chevrolet Equinox EV at $44,995 effective after rebates, with a 52% residual, produces a depreciation base of $21,598. The monthly payment difference on a standard Canadian lease structure before interest rate adjustments is approximately $37 to $44 per month. Over 48 months, that is between $1,776 and $2,112 in additional lease cost on a vehicle with a lower sticker price. The sticker is not the cost. The residual is the cost. Insurance is the second factor that does not appear in the BYD marketing materials. Intact Financial, Aviva Canada, and Desjardins General Insurance have all applied higher comprehensive and collision premiums to Chinese-branded EVs in the 2025 and 2026 underwriting cycles, citing parts availability, repair network limitations, and resale uncertainty as actuarial risk factors. A BYD Atto 3 in Ontario is currently attracting premiums averaging $2,340 per year, according to data compiled by Rates.ca in February 2026. A comparably valued Hyundai Ioniq 5 in the same postal code averages $1,870. That is a $470 annual difference, $1,880 over a 4-year ownership cycle, that does not appear on any BYD price comparison chart. Patrick Bouchard, a Quebec City-based insurance broker who specializes in EV coverage, told Radio Canada's automotive segment in January 2026, "My clients are surprised every time. They think they found a deal. Then the insurance quote comes in and the savings disappear." His client who purchased a BYD Han EV in late 2024 is currently paying $2,680 per year, more than she paid on the Mercedes C-Class she traded in. The total cost of ownership picture for a 2026 BYD purchase in Canada, factoring in the rebate exclusion, the residual value penalty on leases, and the insurance premium, adds between $6,000 and $11,000 to the effective 4-year cost compared to a North American assembled alternative at the same sticker price. That is the number BYD needs a Canadian factory to eliminate. Until that factory exists, you are paying for BYD's infrastructure strategy. What this data shows is straightforward. BYD's Canadian entry is a 2-phase strategy, and you are living through Phase 1. Phase 1 is market presence, 20 dealerships, brand visibility, volume without rebate qualification. Phase 2 begins the moment a Canadian factory is announced, rebate eligibility is unlocked, and the $9,000 effective price advantage materializes overnight. Every BYD dealer signing agreements right now is betting on Phase 2 arriving before 2029. For Canadian buyers evaluating a BYD purchase today, the rational window is not 2026, it is 2028, when a factory announcement either confirms or collapses BYD's Canadian position, residual values stabilize, and insurance markets have sufficient claims history to normalize premiums. Buying in 2026 means absorbing the costs of being an early adopter without the price advantage an early adopter would normally receive. Do you think BYD executes the Canadian factory before 2029? Or does the political negotiation collapse and they build in Tennessee instead? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Next week, which Chinese EV brands have the financial reserves to outlast a 5-year Canadian market entry, and which ones are already running out of runway? You cannot miss that. Thanks for watching.